2 weeks after I buried my father alone in the third row from the back, I sat in a downtown attorney's office and heard my name read first. What came after that dismantled 30 years, not because of anything I did, but because of what my father did, quietly, alone, in the last 14 months of his life, while I slept in the next room. He was a civil engineer. He built things that were meant to last. My name is Eleanor Marsh. Most people call me Ellie. I am 46 years old. I am a paralegal. I drive a 2014 Honda Civic with a crack in the passenger side mirror that I keep meaning to fix, and I make a grocery list every Sunday night before the week starts because that is the kind of person I am. The kind who plans. The kind who shows up. The kind who does what needs doing and does not make a production of it. I tell you that so you understand what I mean when I say that I spent 3 years sleeping on a pull-out cot in my father's living room. Not a bedroom. Not a guest suite. A pull-out cot, the kind with the metal bar that pressed against your spine if you shifted wrong in the night. I kept it folded against the wall during the day so my father would not feel guilty every time he walked past it. He never asked me to do that. I just knew he would feel better if the evidence was put away. His name was Robert Marsh. He was 74 years old, and he had been a civil engineer for 35 years before he retired, and he was the most methodical human being I have ever known. He kept his books organized by subject and then by year. He made his coffee at the same time every morning. He replaced the batteries in the smoke detectors every November, without fail, without being reminded. When he was diagnosed with stage 3 lymphoma, I moved in within 60 days. I learned his medication scheduled the way you learn a new language out of necessity first, and then because you actually start to understand it. I learned the difference between the nausea that could be managed at home and the kind that required a call to the oncology nurse. I learned which of his doctors ran on time and which ones to add 20 minutes to. I learned that he liked the television on low at night, not for the sound but for the light, because the dark made the hours feel longer than they were. I drove him to chemotherapy at 6 in the morning. I refilled the weekly pill organizer every Sunday. I sat with him through the nights that were bad and said nothing, because he did not want comfort. He wanted company. And those are not the same thing. On the nightstand beside his bed, there was always a yellow legal pad. His water glass, his television remote, his reading glasses in the blue case, and the legal pad. He had used them his whole life, the way engineers do. Notes, observations, calculations. I assumed it was for appointments. Insurance information. Whatever a man who had spent 40 years documenting the world around him reached for automatically when the world became difficult to navigate. I never read it. I would not have read it. That was his. I respected that. He died on a Tuesday morning in March at 6:47. I was holding his hand. I sat with him for 20 minutes afterward, in the quiet, before I called anyone. I called my sister Diane first. Her first words, before she asked how I was, before she asked if I was all right, were, "Has anyone called Nora yet?" Nora was his estate attorney. I thought, at the time, that it was just shock. That people say strange things when someone dies and they are not in the room and they are trying to find their footing. I gave her that. I gave her a lot of things over the years without understanding what I was giving away. The funeral was 2 days later. St. Michael's Episcopal Church sits on the corner of Millbrook and 5th, a limestone building with tall, narrow windows and a set of wooden doors that are heavier than they look. The morning of the service, the air inside smelled like candle wax and old wood and something floral that someone had placed too close to the heating vent. It was cold for March. The kind of cold that gets into the building even when everything is closed. I arrived 12 minutes before the service. The family row was full. My Aunt Patricia. 3 cousins. Gerald, Diane's husband. Diane's daughter Kayla. A woman I recognized as a neighbor who had brought my father soup twice in 3 years. Every seat. I stood in the center aisle with my coat still on, and I looked at the row, and I waited for someone to move. To shift. To catch my eye. To do the simple human thing. Diane was seated at the aisle end. She looked up at me. She looked directly at me. And then she turned back to face the altar. I found a seat in the third row from the back. I sat down and I opened the funeral program because I needed something to do with my hands. It was 4 pages, printed on cream cardstock, folded in half. There was a photograph of my father on the front from maybe 15 years ago, before the illness, before the weight loss, when his eyes still had that particular steadiness they always had. I read the inside. His grandchildren were listed. Gerald was listed. Aunt Patricia was listed. A brief note thanking the staff of the oncology department at Mercy General. And there, under beloved family, in the same tasteful serif font as everything else. Diane Marsh Calloway, devoted daughter and family anchor. I read it twice. I turned the page. I read the back. I turned back to the inside and read it again, slowly, because I was certain I had missed something. I had not missed anything. Eleanor Marsh's name was not in that program. Not once. Not in the acknowledgments, not in the family listing, not in the small italicized note at the bottom thanking those who had provided care. I had provided 3 years of care. My name was not there. The minister asked the family to rise. The people in the front row stood. I stood too, from the third row from the back, and I watched the backs of their heads, Patricia's silver hair, Kayla's dark braid, Diane's shoulders in a black dress that fit very well, and not one of them turned around. I told myself what I had been telling myself for 40 years. That people who do the right thing quietly eventually get seen. That patience is not the same as invisibility. That the truth has a way of arriving, even when it is late. I almost believed it. What I did not know, what none of us knew yet, was that my father had not been quiet at all. He had been writing. The house was lit up from the inside. Every window. The kitchen, the living room, the light above the back porch that my father only ever turned on when company was staying late. I could see movement through the glass, shapes, silhouettes, the particular way a room looks when it is full of people talking. Someone laughed. I heard it from the driveway, muffled through the car window, and then it was gone. I had not been told there was a gathering. I found out the way I found out most things that happened in this family, after the fact, from someone who assumed I already knew. A cousin had texted me the address, which was my father's address, which I had been driving to for 3 years. As if I might have forgotten where he lived. I sat in my car in the dark and I did not go inside. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I did not want to walk into a room full of people holding wine glasses and asking me how I was holding up. Both of those things were true, but they were not the only reason. Through the living room window, I could see Diane. She was standing near the fireplace in the same black dress from the church, and she was gesturing that wide, expressive way she has both hands, like whatever she was saying required the full use of her body to communicate. People were leaning toward her. That has always been Diane's gift. She fills a room in a way that makes people want to be closer to whatever she is saying. Then Aunt Patricia came into the frame. Patricia is my father's sister. She is 71 years old, and she has a kind face, and she has spent most of her life agreeing with whoever was loudest in the room. She walked straight to Diane and put her arms around her, and Diane held her, rubbing slow circles on her back the way you do with someone who is inconsolable. I watched that for a moment. I remembered something Patricia said to me once, about 4 years ago, at a birthday dinner for one of the cousins. She had pulled me aside in the kitchen gently, the way she does everything, like she was delivering news she wished she didn't have, and she said, "You know, Ellie, sometimes I worry you hold yourself too separate from the family." Diane tries so hard to bring everyone together. I just wish you'd let her. I had smiled. I had nodded. I had said something like, I know, Patricia, I'll try, because that was easier than explaining that I had spent the previous weekend cleaning my father's bathroom and reorganizing his medications after a bad reaction to a dosage adjustment. I had not tried. I had gone back to doing what I was doing, which was taking care of him. My phone buzzed. A text from my cousin Derek. We had not spoken in nearly 2 years, not for any particular reason, just the slow drift of lives that don't cross enough. It said, thinking of you today. Diane mentioned you needed some space. Hope you're doing okay. I read it twice. Diane mentioned I needed some space. Diane told them I chose not to be here. I sat with that for a long time. In the quiet car in the cold driveway, watching the light move behind the windows of my father's house. That was when I started going back. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just the way you go back when something that felt like an isolated incident suddenly stops feeling isolated. You pull on a thread and you find it goes further than you expected. I thought about the year I turned 24. Fresh out of my certification program, a business plan typed up and printed and bound with a binder clip because I had done it right, the way I did everything. I asked my father for a $15,000 loan to open a small legal services office. He thought about it for a week. Then he called me and said he didn't think it was the right time, that he worried I was moving too fast, that maybe I should get more experience first. I had accepted that. I had spent the next 22 years building my career inside someone else's law firm. At the time, his reasoning sounded like caution, like a father being careful. I was starting to wonder if it had been something else. I thought about the family reunion I never went to, the one I found out about through a photograph on Patricia's refrigerator, a group portrait taken on someone's back porch, a gap in the arrangement where someone might have stood. Diane had said she sent the invitation, and I must have missed it. She said it with her hand on my arm and her face arranged in something that looked like sympathy. I thought about Paul. For years we were together. When he ended it, he used phrases I recognized, not because they were common phrases, but because they were Diane's phrases. You're not really present, Ellie. You're there, but you're not there. He said it like he had arrived at it himself. Later, years later, he told me he'd spent a lot of time with Diane and her husband that last year. He said she was very warm, very concerned. He said she had seemed to really care about him. I had thought, at the time, that was a coincidence. I pulled out my phone. I opened Diane's Facebook page. 3 years of posts. I scrolled back to the beginning, to the week our father was diagnosed, and I read forward. Post after post about the weight of watching a parent suffer. Comments from friends offering prayers, offering help, offering whatever she needed. Diane responding to each one with a paragraph, sometimes 2. Grateful. Gracious. Heartbroken. I scrolled and I scrolled. 3 years of posts. My name appeared in none of them. Not once. There were photographs of Diane at the house, the holiday visits, a Sunday afternoon that must have been the weekend she brought a photographer, my father looking thin but smiling for the camera. The caption on that one said, "Treasure every moment." That's all we can do. And then I found the one from 3 months before he died. He had been in hospice care by then. I had been sleeping 4 hours a night. I had learned to doze in the recliner next to his bed, so I would hear him if he needed something. Diane had visited once that month. She stayed 6 hours. She took photographs. The post said, "It's been so hard being the one who's emotionally present through all of this." 1,400 people had liked it. 1,400 people. I sat in the car and I looked at that number for a long time. I thought, this is what she built. While I was learning to read his blood pressure cuff, she was building a public record. While I was at the 24-hour pharmacy at 2 in the morning, she was responding to comments. She had constructed, over 3 years, a version of events in which she was the devoted daughter and I was what? Invisible. Absent. The one who needed space. I thought that was the extent of it. I thought the cruelty was the performance, that she had taken credit for something she hadn't done, and that was the whole of it. I was wrong about the whole of it. I was still sitting in that driveway at 11 o'clock when the lights in the house finally went out. I drove home and I made myself a cup of tea and I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about the legal pad on my father's nightstand, the one I never read. And I thought, I wonder what he was writing in there. I wondered it for 14 days. And then I found out. Nora Thibodeau's office was on the 11th floor of a building downtown that had a revolving door and a lobby that smelled like floor wax and recycled air. The elevator was slow. I remember that clearly standing in front of it, watching the numbers descend, wearing the same old coat I had worn to the funeral because it is the only good coat I own, and I had not thought to think about that until I was already in the parking garage. 2 weeks had passed since the service. 2 weeks of the particular silence that follows a death, the silence of a phone that rings less, of a weekly routine that no longer has its anchor, of reaching for something that is no longer there. I had gone back to work after 10 days. I had filed paperwork and made calls and eaten lunch at my desk and been, as far as anyone could tell, fine. I am good at fine. I did not expect anything from this meeting. That is not false modesty. It is the truth. I was a paralegal. I understood estate administration. I knew that wills are not always what people expect, that the legal relationship between a parent and an adult child is complicated, that 3 years of caregiving does not automatically translate into inheritance. I had not allowed myself to form an expectation because I did not want to sit in that conference room and feel something I had no right to feel. I pushed open the glass door to Nora's suite at 9:58. Diane was already there. She was seated at the far end of the long conference table, the good chair, the one with its back to the window, so that anyone across from her would have the light in their eyes. Gerald sat to her right, and to her left sat a man I had never seen before. Mid-50s. Dark suit. A leather briefcase, the good kind, the kind that closes with a clasp rather than a zipper. He had the particular stillness of someone who had been in many rooms like this one and had learned to take up space without appearing to. A private attorney. That was my first thought. My second thought was, she hired him before today. Diane did not look up when I came in. Gerald did. He turned, and his face arranged itself into something that resembled pleasant surprise, and he said, "Oh, Ellie, you came. Just like that. You came." As if my presence required an explanation. As if the default assumption had been my absence. I sat down across from them. I put my bag on the floor. I folded my hands on the table because it gave them somewhere to be. Nora entered 3 minutes later. She is a small woman, late 50s, with reading glasses on a chain and the unhurried manner of someone who has delivered difficult news enough times to understand that efficiency is a form of mercy. She placed a file on the table, thick, tabbed, held together with a wide rubber band, and she removed the rubber band and opened it without preamble or greeting beyond a quiet acknowledgement of everyone present. She said she would begin with a trust. Diane shifted in her chair. Her hands, which had been resting loosely in front of her, moved to her lap. Nora said, "The Robert Marsh Family Trust, executed 14 months ago, names Eleanor Margaret Marsh as sole trustee and primary beneficiary of the trust estate, including the family property at." Diane stood up. Not loudly. Not dramatically. She simply rose from her chair the way someone does when they have been waiting to rise, when they have rehearsed the moment and decided that standing is the correct register for what they are about to say. In the 2 seconds between her standing and her speaking, Gerald leaned across the table. He did it quietly, privately. with the particular composure of a man who has spent 30 years in conference rooms and knows exactly how much space his voice needs to fill without being overheard by the wrong person. He said, "Sweetie, you should know we're prepared to challenge this. There are real questions about Dad's capacity in those final months. About the kind of influence a live-in caregiver can have over a vulnerable person." He let that sit for exactly one beat. Then, "It's nothing personal. Sweetie, it's nothing personal." He was describing my father as mentally diminished. He was describing my 3 years the cot, the pill organizer, the 6 a.m. drives to chemotherapy as manipulation. He was sitting in a conference room with a hired attorney and calling me sweetie and telling me it was not personal. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I looked at Nora. Nora had not reacted to Gerald. She had not looked at him while he spoke. She waited until he finished, and then she looked at Diane, who was still standing, drawing breath to speak, and Nora said, in exactly the same measured tone she had been using since she walked through the door, "Mrs. Calloway, before you respond, Mr. Marsh also left a sealed letter." Diane stopped. "It has already been filed with the probate court," Nora continued. "Whatever you're intending to raise today, I want you to know it has already been anticipated." And answered. The private attorney opened his mouth. He closed it. Gerald looked at the table. Diane sat back down. I understood, in that moment, that my father had known this was coming. He had not just written a will. He had built something, some larger structure I could not yet see the edges of, specifically designed to answer a challenge that had not been filed yet. I thought that was the revelation. The sealed letter, the probate filing, the fact that Diane's plan had a countermeasure she hadn't known about. I thought that was the extent of what this room was going to show me. Then Nora reached into the file. She produced a clear protective sleeve, the kind used to preserve documents, and she placed it on the table in front of me. Inside the sleeve was a yellow legal pad. I knew that legal pad. I had seen it on my father's nightstand every single morning for 11 months. I had moved it once, gently, when I was straightening the table and it slid toward the edge. I had set it back without opening it, the cover facing up, the pages undisturbed. I had assumed it was for appointments, for notes, for the small administrative record-keeping of a man managing a serious illness. Nora said, "Mr. Marsh asked that this be introduced at this meeting." She looked at me for just a moment before she continued. "Ms. Marsh, it is not a medication log." The room was very quiet. Nora said my father had been keeping that legal pad for 3 years. 94 pages. Dated entries. And she said, and I will never forget this as long as I live, she said, before I read from it, there are some other documents I need you to see first. Because the legal pad is not the most serious thing in this file. The most serious thing in this file is what your sister did 18 months ago, and why your father never said a word about it to anyone until he was alone with his attorney. The conference room had not changed in the 20 minutes since we arrived. Same long table. Same gray light coming through the window that faced the parking structure. Same 4 chairs on one side, same 2 on mine. But the air in the room felt different now, the way a room feels when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, when the walls have absorbed a new kind of information and the acoustics are quietly different for it. Diane's private attorney had his head bent toward her. He was saying something very quietly, his hand half covering his mouth. Gerald had not moved in several minutes. His hands were flat on the table and his eyes were on a fixed point somewhere between him and Nora, and he was doing the particular kind of stillness that I recognized from my years in law, the stillness of someone calculating, not someone waiting. Nora opened to a new tab in the file. She said, 18 months before Mr. Marsh's death, there was an account in your name, Ms. Marsh. It was called the Eleanor's Education Fund. I said, I'm sorry. An account, she said again, patient, unhurried. In your name. Opened in 1994. I looked at her. I said, I don't have an account from 1994. I would know if I had an account. You were not told about it, Nora said. Mr. Marsh opened it himself. He was the account holder of record. Your name was attached as the intended beneficiary. I sat with that for a moment. I was 24 years old in 1994. I had just finished my certification program. I had a business plan typed and printed and held together with a binder clip, and I had asked my father for a $15,000 loan, and he had thought about it for a week and then told me it wasn't the right time. I said, what was in it? Nora said, as of 18 months ago, $67,000. He had been making quiet, regular deposits for nearly 30 years. 30 years. I did not speak. I do not know for how long. The number sat in the room, and I looked at it the way you look at something you are trying to understand the dimensions of, not because it is incomprehensible, but because your mind needs a moment to actually place it. Nora said, he wrote about it in his affidavit. He said he opened the account the year you completed your program. He had planned to tell you about it when the time was right, when you were ready to use it to open your own practice. She paused. Then she said, more quietly, he also documented that approximately 22 years ago, your sister privately discouraged him from providing you with a business loan you had requested. He believed, in hindsight, that this was part of a longer pattern. Diane did not move. She did not flinch, did not look at me, did not look at Nora. She looked at the middle distance with the careful blankness of someone who has decided that no expression is the safest expression. I thought about being 24. I thought about the week I waited for my father's answer. I thought about the way he had sounded on the phone, not unkind, just firm, the way he was about things he had decided. It's not the right time, Ellie. Get more experience first. I had accepted it. I had spent the next 22 years building my career inside someone else's office, helping other people with their legal problems, filing other people's paperwork, watching other people's clocks. My entire adult life had been shaped by a phone call I was never meant to know about. I looked at my sister. She still did not look back. Across the table, Diane finally spoke. Not to Nora. Not to me. To the private attorney beside her, low and close, this is exactly what I was telling you. She spent 3 years alone with him. You don't think she could have influenced what he believed? You don't think someone like Ellie, someone who always has to be in control of every situation, could have shaped what he wrote in that file? The attorney murmured something I could not hear. Diane continued, just loud enough. She doesn't do things out of love. She never has. She does things so she can say she did them. That's what this is. It's always been about control with her, never about family. She said it to the attorney. She said it as if I were not in the room. As if I were already peripheral, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be spoken to. Nora let the sentence land, and then she continued as if it had not been said. She turned to a new section of the file. She placed a stack of documents on the table, 5 or 6 pages, stapled in the top left corner. She said, these are the transfer records. For transactions. 6 weeks. Beginning 18 months before my father's death. The money moved from the education fund through 2 intermediate accounts and settled, finally, into a joint investment account registered to Diane and Gerald Calloway. Gerald's hands, flat on the table, did not move. Nora placed one more document beside the stack. A single page. A case number printed at the top in the header of a banking institution I recognized, the same regional group where Gerald had worked for the better part of 3 decades. She said, when the transfers were processed, they were flagged automatically by the bank's Elder Financial Exploitation Monitoring System. The flag generated an internal report. That report was escalated, rather than filed and set aside, because the account initiating the transfers was connected to a former employee of the banking group's regional affiliate. She looked at Gerald directly for the first time. This report, she said, already exists in a system that is not controlled by anyone in this room. Gerald's jaw moved. Once. Then he was still again. I understood what that meant. I had been a paralegal for 12 years. I knew exactly what an escalated elder exploitation flag meant in terms of what came next, who it notified, what it set in motion. The machinery was already running. It had been running before this meeting began. Before any of us sat down. I thought, until that moment, that Diane had tried to take a will. She had taken something else first. 30 years of my father's quiet love, 30 years of small, regular deposits into an account I never knew about, intended to give me the thing she took from me when I was 24 years old. She had found it, and she had emptied it. That was when I understood the shape of what I was actually looking at. I looked across that table at my sister, at the woman who had stolen 30 years of compounding love from a savings account I never knew existed, and I realized something I should have understood much sooner. I had been thinking of this as a story about a will. It wasn't. It was a story about a legal pad, and I still hadn't heard what was in it. Nora did not rush. That was the thing I noticed, the thing I kept noticing, across that entire meeting. She moved through the file with the unhurried precision of someone who had organized this information long before today and knew exactly what order it needed to arrive in. She was not performing. She was delivering. There is a difference, and I recognized it because it is what I try to do in my own work, keep the emotion out of the sequence and let the sequence speak. She opened the legal pad to the first tabbed page. The writing was in blue ink. In my father's hand, the tight, deliberate print of a man who had spent his career producing technical documents. Not cursive. Each letter formed individually, carefully, the way you write when you understand that what you are writing may need to be read by someone who did not know you. Diane's attorney leaned forward slightly. Then he leaned back. Nora said she would read 6 entries. Not all 94 pages. 6. The first was dated 14 months before my father's death. It read, Dee called Nora's office today, identifying herself as my daughter, requesting information about estate documents. Office declined and notified me. Same evening, Dee called me and said she had spoken with my attorney and gotten everything sorted. This is false. I am noting it. I looked at Diane. She was looking at the table. Her hands, which had been restless for the past 20 minutes, were now flat and still, the way hands go still when the body decides that no movement is the safest movement. The second entry Nora read was from 11 months before his death. Dee called Patricia again this week. I heard the call from the kitchen. Dee told Patricia that Ellie is controlling access to the house and limiting family visits. This is false. Ellie went to the pharmacy. I had asked her to go. I am noting this. Across the table, Diane's private attorney put his pen down. He picked it up again. He wrote something. He was not writing notes about the case. He was writing something to show Diane. I could tell by the angle of the pad, turned toward her, the way he slid it quietly in her direction. She read it without moving her head. Then she looked away. The third entry was from the week of the Facebook post. My father's handwriting described seeing the post on the tablet I had set up for him, the one he used for video calls with relatives. For the rare occasion, he wanted to look something up himself. He wrote that he had shown it to Ellie. He wrote what he had said to her. Told E, I see you. I want you to know that I see you. She thanked me. She did not know what I meant. I meant it precisely. I had sat on the edge of his bed that afternoon and held his hand, and I had thought he was offering comfort. General comfort. The kind of thing a father says to a daughter who is tired. I had squeezed his hand and said, I know, Dad. I had not known. I understood now. That was the third entry. I thought, at that moment, that what the legal pad contained was documentation of Diane's campaign, her calls to Patricia, her interference with the attorney's office, her public performance of devoted daughterhood. I thought that was what he had been building. A record of her behavior. That was not all he had been building. Nora turned to the 5th tab. She said, "This is the second to last entry. Written 11 days before Mr. Marsh's death." She read, changed my sheets today and read to me for an hour. She does not know about any of this. She has not asked me for anything in 3 years. I want the record to reflect that clearly. She has not asked me for a single thing. The room was quiet. Diane made a sound, not a word, not quite, something between a breath and a syllable, and her attorney touched her arm, once, briefly. She pressed her lips together. Then Nora produced a small recording device and placed it on the table. She said, "Mr. Marsh, with guidance from this office, legally recorded 4 phone calls with Diane Marsh Calloway in the final 14 months of his life. I'm going to play a portion of the 4th call." She pressed play. Diane's voice came through the small speaker. It was warm, concerned. The voice she uses with people she wants to believe her, the particular register she has always been able to access, the one that sounds like love and functions like leverage. She said, "Dad, Ellie has been isolating you. We're worried about you. We think you should let Gerald take over the accounts, just so everything is protected. You know we just want what's best for you." Then a pause on the recording. Longer than was comfortable. Then my father's voice. Measured. Quiet. The voice I had heard every day for 3 years. "I appreciate your concern, sweetheart." Then silence. Then the sound of him asking whether she had spoken to her daughter recently. A subject change. Gentle, unremarkable. The kind of pivot a person makes when they have finished getting what they came for and want to move the conversation somewhere harmless. The recording ended. He had said, "I appreciate your concern, sweetheart," and then he had ended the call and written it down. He was a civil engineer. He documented what mattered. He did not confront her. He collected her. Gerald looked at his hands. Nora reached into the file one final time. She placed a document in the center of the table, not in front of me, not in front of Diane or Gerald, but equidistant in the center so that anyone at that table would have to look at it regardless of where they were sitting. It was several pages, held together with a binder clip, and the header at the top identified it as a forensic document examination report. She said, "The power of attorney used to authorize the account transfers was examined by a certified forensic document specialist retained by this office. The examiner found that the signature on the POA was traced, physically overlaid on a scanned copy of Mr. Marsh's legitimate signature from a 2019 medical authorization and reproduced from that tracing." She paused. The examiner confirmed this in writing 9 months ago. Another pause. Mr. Marsh was alive when this report was completed. She let that land where it needed to land. He chose not to confront either of you with it. Gerald stood up. He did it without a word, without looking at Diane, without looking at me. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and he walked to the door. The door opened and closed behind him with a sound that was quieter than anything that had happened in that room. Nora said, "The estate will be filing a formal criminal complaint with the district attorney's office regarding the account transfers and the document in question. You'll want to speak with your attorney before responding to anything further today." Diane's private attorney leaned over and said something in her ear. She listened. Then she stood. And for just a second, 1 second, before she walked out, she looked at me. Not with guilt. Not with regret. With something I can only describe as recalibration. The expression of someone who has just received new information and is already sorting it into a new architecture. Already building the next version of the story. I thought, you don't know yet. You still don't know what's about to happen outside this room. Because Nora had made one phone call before this meeting that neither of us knew about. She had called Aunt Patricia. The parking garage beneath Nora's building smelled like concrete and exhaust and the particular cold of underground spaces that never fully warm up, regardless of the season. I found my car on the second level. I sat down in the driver's seat and I closed the door. I did not start the engine. I sat there in the gray quiet, and I let it come, all of it, everything I had been holding in that conference room with my hands folded on the table and my face arranged into something that resembled composure. The education fund. 30 years of quiet deposits my father made for me while I did not know they existed. The recording of his voice saying, "I appreciate your concern, sweetheart," while his older daughter told him his younger daughter was isolating him. The trace signature. The transfers. The 6 weeks it took them to empty something he had spent 3 decades building. I cried in the parking garage for a long time. Not loudly. Not dramatically. The kind of crying that does not have a sound so much as a pressure, something that needs to leave the body and does, slowly, until the worst of it has passed and what remains is a specific kind of exhaustion that is almost, like calm. When it was over, I blew my nose with the fast food napkins I keep in the center console. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror for a moment. Then I got out of the car. There was a coffee shop across the street from Nora's building. One of those narrow ones with a chalkboard menu and small marble tables and the sound of an espresso machine running almost continuously in the background. I went in. I ordered tea. I found a table near the window and I sat down and I spread my coat over the chair beside me and I looked out at the street. I am a paralegal. I have been one for 12 years. I know what formal criminal complaint with the district attorney's office means. I know what a forensic document examination report means as evidence in an elder financial exploitation case. I know what it means when a banking institution's internal escalation flag already has a case number, that the machinery is not waiting for anyone's permission. It is already running. It was running before we sat down this morning. My father had not left me with a task. He had left me with a completed one. I ordered a second cup of tea. My phone rang. The screen said Diane. I looked at it for 2 full rings. Then I answered. Her voice was controlled, the surface of it was controlled, but underneath the control there was something fraying. The particular unraveling of a person who has spent 30 years managing a story and has just watched a significant portion of it become evidence. She said, "Ellie, I need you to hear me. Whatever those documents say, whatever Nora put in front of you in that room, I was the one who loved him. I was the one who was truly there for him. Emotionally. You know as well as I do that what you did was not about love. It was never about love with you." I did not speak. I let her continue. "You turned Dad into a project. You moved in there because you needed something to manage. Because that is what you do. You find something to control and you call it caring. And I'm supposed to feel guilty for challenging that? For asking the obvious question about what kind of influence a person like you has over a sick, vulnerable man. A person like you." I kept listening. "You don't do things out of love, Ellie. You never have. You do things so you can say you did them. It's always been about control with you. It has never been about family. The family knows that. They have always known that. And I am not going to let you rewrite 30 years of history with a stack of legal documents." She was still talking. I had stopped hearing the individual words and was just noting the shape of them, the architecture of the argument she was building in real time, the one she intended to take to the extended family before the afternoon was over. She was already spinning. She had left the attorney's office, and she was already on the phone, already constructing the next version. I waited until she finished. Then I said, "Diane." "What?" "Nora called Aunt Patricia this morning." Silence. Not the silence of someone thinking. The silence of someone who has just understood something they cannot understand. I said, "I'm going to let you go now." I ended the call. I set my phone face down on the marble table. I looked out the window. I counted to 10. Then I turned the phone over. The family group chat had 73 members. I had not opened it since the day of the funeral, when Derek's text arrived telling me that Diane had said I needed space. The first message from Aunt Patricia had come in 4 minutes ago. It was a screenshot. A photograph of a page from the legal pad, the entry Nora had read aloud about the phone call, the one where my father documented what Diane had told Patricia in his tight blue print, with the date at the top and the note at the bottom. This is false. E. went to the pharmacy. Below the screenshot, Patricia had written 7 words. I need everyone to read this. I am so sorry, Ellie. I watched the chat move. Within 20 minutes, a cousin I had not spoken to in years had posted the text exchange between Diane and Gerald, the messages about the account transfer timing that had been obtained as part of the estate investigation. The timestamps. The account numbers partially visible. Gerald's message to Diane reading, second transfer cleared. Waiting on the third. Within an hour, someone had placed Diane's Facebook post, "It's been so hard being the one who's emotionally present through all of this," side by side with the transfer record dated from the same week. Diane's 3 years of devoted daughter posts, assembled in public by the people who had liked and shared and commented on them, held now against the documents her own father had quietly handed to an attorney. The group chat did not fragment. It detonated. I watched the read receipts climb. Message after message. Cousin after cousin, aunt after aunt, the neighbors and family, friends and relatives I had not seen in years, all reading the same documents in real time, all arriving at the same place. And then the chat went quiet. Not because people had left. The read receipts were still climbing. 73 people, all reading, none speaking. That silence was its own kind of answer. I thought, my father wrote 94 pages, and I have only heard 6 of them. There is one more entry I haven't heard yet. The one Nora did not read aloud in the conference room. The one she said wasn't legally relevant. I needed to go home. I needed to go to the house. The key was still on my keyring where it had always been, third from the left, the one with the small scratch on the bow from the time I dropped it on the concrete driveway in the dark, coming home at 2 a.m. from a pharmacy run. I had never taken it off. It had not occurred to me to take it off. I let myself in through the front door. The house was cold. Not dramatically cold, just the particular coolness of a space that has been sitting empty for a few hours, where the heat runs on a timer and no one has thought to adjust it. The curtains in the living room were the same ones. The side table by the door still had his ceramic bowl for keys and change, still had the library book he had never finished, a history of the Panama Canal, 3/4 read, a folded receipt tucked in as a bookmark. I stood in the front hall for a moment and did not move. Then I walked to the living room and I sat down in his chair. It was a wingback, dark green, slightly worn on the right armrest where his elbow always rested. It still smelled like him, a specific combination of his soap and the wool blanket he kept folded over the back, the kind of smell that you don't notice when someone is alive and cannot stop noticing once they are gone. I set the legal pad in my lap. Nora had released the original to me that afternoon, with the certified copy retained for the estate file. The cover was worn at the corners. The spiral binding had bent slightly, the way it does when a pad has been opened and closed many times. I turned to the first page. The first entry was dated 3 years ago, 2 weeks after my diagnosis call with his oncologist, when I had driven over to sit with him and we had talked, for the first time, about what the next year might look like. He wrote, "E. came over tonight. We talked about the schedule. She did not make it about herself once. Took notes. Asked about the nurses by name before she had met them. I noticed that. I turned the page. My phone was on the side table beside the chair, face up, and it had not stopped moving since I sat down. The group chat, 73 people, still running, had not quieted after the first wave. It had accelerated. Someone had found Diane's post from 18 months ago. The one where she wrote about the difficulty of watching from a distance when you know the person you love is not getting the full support they need. Posted the same week the second transfer cleared. The same week Gerald had texted Diane, waiting on the third. The comments under that post, which had accumulated over 18 months, all the prayers, all the "you are such a strong woman," all the "your family is lucky to have you," were still visible. The post was still public. For approximately another 40 minutes, until it wasn't. A cousin named Marin, 12 years old the last time we had been in the same room, now in her mid-20s, posted a side-by-side image. On the left, the transfer record with its dates and amounts. On the right, a screenshot of Diane's Facebook post from that same week, time-stamped, publicly visible. No caption. The image said everything the caption would have. I turned another page in the legal pad. Entry, 22 months ago. D called again. Asked me how I was sleeping. Asked me if Ellie gave me enough privacy. I said yes. I am noting her language. She has been asking about privacy for 6 months. I think she is building something. I have called Nora. He had known. He had been watching and noting and calling his attorney, and he had not said a word to me, not because he was hiding it from me, but because he did not want me to carry it. He was protecting me from the weight of it while I was protecting him from everything else. We had been doing it at the same time in the same house, neither of us knowing the other was doing it. That was when I understood who my father actually was. My phone screen lit up. A message from a number I did not recognize, an attorney's office, as it turned out, not mine, not Nora's. They had been retained by Diane. Past tense. The message was a forwarded notification. Diane's private attorney had withdrawn representation, effective immediately. When an attorney withdraws that quickly, it means one thing. It means the evidence file is worse than the client represented it to be. It means the attorney looked at what Nora's office had assembled and made a calculation. Gerald's calculation was different. His calculation arrived, 2 hours later, in the form of a certified letter from the state banking regulator's office. A notice that his former employer's correspondent bank had formally referred the flagged elder exploitation report for regulatory review. His name was in the header. The case number matched the one Nora had placed on the conference table that morning. That case number was now in 2 systems. Neither of them was controlled by anyone in that family. And then Nora's office sent the final document. The call log from Diane's contact with Nora's office, the one where Diane had identified herself as Robert Marsh's daughter and attempted to obtain estate information. The recording of that call, which Nora's office had retained as a matter of standard practice. Diane's voice, warm and authoritative, saying she just needed to confirm a few things, that her father had asked her to check in, that she wanted to make sure everything was on track. The office had declined. Had notified my father. My father had written it down. That recording, released as part of the formal complaint to the district attorney, was not just evidence of the account transfers. It was evidence of attempted interference with the estate process while Robert Marsh was still alive. It closed the loop that the transfer records opened. It transformed what might have been argued as a family misunderstanding into a documented, multi-step campaign, recorded, witnessed, dated, and filed. The family group chat had gone from detonation to something quieter and more permanent. Not the noise of people processing. The silence of people who have finished processing and arrived somewhere they cannot come back from. I turned back to the legal pad. I read through the night. Entry after entry, the names of his nurses, written down the first week I learned them. The notation about the Sunday pill organizer, how I refilled it at the same time each week without being asked. A description of a night, 14 months before his death, when his pain was very bad and I had sat with him from 2 until 5 in the morning and said almost nothing, and he had written afterward, she did not perform. She was simply there. I have been trying to find the right word for what that is. I think the word is presence. The legal pad was not a record of Diane's betrayal. That was in it. But it was not what it was. It was a portrait of me, drawn by someone who had been watching carefully for 3 years, in the particular way that quiet, observant people watch, not to judge, not to document for documentation's sake, but because they see something they want to make sure they have gotten right. My father had spent 3 years making sure he had gotten me right. I read all 94 pages that night, and when I got to the last entry, the one Nora had read in the conference room, I turned the page. Because I had noticed, when Nora handed me the pad, that there was writing on the page after that. One more entry. 11 days before he died. In handwriting, I had to hold the page at an angle to read. It was so thin. I read it. And I sat in his chair, and I let myself feel every single thing I had been holding for 3 years. Because he had seen me. He had seen me the whole time. 3 months is not a long time. It is long enough, it turns out, for a referral network built over 30 years to go quiet. Client by client. Not loudly. There were no announcements, no public statements, no dramatic confrontations. Just the particular silence of people who have read something and cannot unread it, making the particular decision that people make when they realize the person they were referring their friends to had been, for some time, someone else entirely. Diane's interior design business had run largely on social capital, on trust, on the specific currency of being the woman people called when they wanted someone warm, someone tasteful, someone whose home always looked effortless and who would bring that same effortlessness to yours. That currency does not survive a family group chat with 73 members and a forensic document examiner's report. I did not track it. I did not need to. I was in the house. That is the part one come back to when I think about those 3 months. Not the criminal complaint, though it was filed. Not the restitution order, though it is in process. Not Gerald's banking regulator finding, though it became public record in the way that regulatory findings do quietly, permanently, attached to his name in a system that does not forget. All of those things happened. All of them matter. But the thing I keep returning to is simpler than any of them. I was in the house. I was not watching through the window. The back porch faced east. I discovered this in a way I had never had the occasion to discover it in the 3 years I lived here, by sitting on it in the early morning with a cup of coffee, unhurried, with nowhere to be except where I was. The light came in at an angle through the gap in the neighbor's fence that my father had always meant to have repaired and never gotten around to. The wood of the porch railing was slightly soft in one spot near the steps, where moisture had gotten in. I made a note to have it looked at. Not urgently. When the time was right. There is a version of this story, I think, where what I feel is triumph. I do not feel triumph. I want to be honest about that. What I feel, what I have been feeling slowly, across these 3 months, is closer to the sensation of setting something down that you did not realize you were carrying. Not relief exactly. Not victory. Just the particular quiet of a person who has stopped bracing for something. Diane sent one message 5 weeks after the will reading. Not a call. A text. It arrived on a Thursday evening, and I read it standing in my father's kitchen, where I had been making dinner. His recipe for the lentil soup he made every October, the one I had memorized by watching him rather than by writing it down. The message said, I want you to know that I don't hate you, Ellie. I know you think I do. I know you've always wanted to believe I was the villain in your story. But the truth is I feel sorry for you. You spent 3 years in that house, and you still couldn't just let yourself be loved without turning it into a transaction. That is not something I did to you. That is something you did to yourself. I hope someday you can see that. I read it twice. I set my phone face down on the counter and I stirred the soup. I thought about all the things I could have said. The documents, the recordings, the forensic report, the legal pad with 94 pages of my father's precise, dated, irrefutable witnessing. I thought about how many sentences it would take to dismantle what she had just written, and how many of those sentences were already filed with the probate court, and how many had already been read by 73 people in a group chat that she was no longer a member of. There was nothing left to say that had not already been said better by someone who was no longer here to say it. I did not respond. There was one letter I did write. To Paul. 3 sentences on paper, mailed the old way, because some things should not be texts. I wrote, I recently learned some things that explain things I could not explain when we were together. I am not writing to revisit what happened. I just wanted you to know that I understand it now, and I am all right. I sealed it and walked it to the mailbox at the end of the street and dropped it in and walked back. I did not wait to see if he would write back. That was not why I had written. Aunt Patricia sent a letter. It was 4 pages, handwritten, on the cream stationery she has always used, the kind with a small floral border at the top that I remembered from birthday cards she sent when I was a child. The handwriting was careful. The kind of careful that happens when someone has written a thing several times before writing the version they actually send. She wrote about the funeral, about sitting in the family row, about the moment she saw me standing in the aisle and made the decision, her word, decision, to look away. She wrote that she had told herself it was not her place to intervene. She wrote that she had known, even as she told herself that it was not true. She wrote about 30 years of following Diane's social lead because Diane was loud and Patricia was not, and because it had always seemed easier to let Diane define the room than to occupy any part of it herself. She wrote, I told myself I was keeping the peace. I understand now that I was keeping her power. She wrote that she was sorry. Specifically, itemized, almost the reunion, the birthday dinner, the things she had repeated to other family members that she now understood had come from Diane and not from any observation of her own. She wrote it the way someone writes when they have finally stopped being careful about the wrong things and started being careful about the right ones. I read it twice, standing at the kitchen counter. Then I folded it and put it back in the envelope. I was not ready to respond. I did not know if I would ever be ready. I did not feel guilty about that. Patricia made her decisions across 30 years, one small choice at a time, and the accumulation of those choices had its own weight that a 4-page letter could not simply lift. She had done a brave thing by sending it. That was true. It was also true that brave things done late are still late. I set the envelope on the corner of the kitchen table, and I went back to making dinner. Diane's social media went private 6 days after the group chat. I did not check for it. Someone told me, a cousin, in a brief message, no commentary attached, just the information. I noted it the way you note a weather change. Then, 2 weeks after it went private, it went silent. No new posts, no stories, no activity of any kind. And then, sometime in the 5th week, the accounts went dark entirely. Deactivated or deleted, there was no way to know which, and it did not matter. 3 years of devoted daughter posts. 1,400 likes on a single caption. The photographs of my father looking thin and smiling, the paragraphs about the weight of watching a parent suffer, the comments she had answered with grace and gratitude, and a paragraph each, all of it, gone. Accessible to no one. The record that remained was in Nora's files, in the probate court, in the district attorney's office, in the state banking regulator's public finding, attached permanently to Gerald Calloway's professional history, and in a 94-page yellow legal pad sitting on the side table beside my father's chair. It is a Thursday evening in late spring. The living room windows face west, and the light at this hour comes in low and long, the kind of late afternoon light that makes everything look considered. The game show is on, the same one we used to watch together, the one where he would occasionally make a dry comment about a contestant's strategy and then go quiet again, and I would laugh, and he would allow himself a small smile. I do not change the channel. The legal pad is in my lap. The cover is more worn now than it was the night Nora handed it to me. I have read it many times. The way you reread a letter from someone who is gone, not because you have forgotten what it says, but because the reading itself is a kind of conversation. Because it is the closest thing remaining to being in the same room. I turn to the last page. The entry Nora read in the conference room, she has not asked me for a single thing. And then the line below it. The one Nora did not read because it was not legally relevant. The one my father wrote 11 days before he died, in the thinnest handwriting on the pad, the letters still formed individually and carefully, still legible if you held the page at an angle toward the light. I hope she knows. I should have said it more. I hope she knows. He should have said it more. I know that. I also know that he said it in the only language he actually trusted, the language of documentation, of precision, of showing up every single day and writing down what he saw. My father was a civil engineer. He built things that were meant to last. He built me a legal fortress and a 94-page love letter and a house that smells like him, and he did it quietly, alone, in the last 14 months of his life, while I slept in the next room not knowing any of it. The game show is on. I don't change the channel. The chair smells like him. The house is mine. The legal pad is in my hands. And somewhere in the city, Diane Marsh Calloway is learning what it costs to erase a person who was never actually invisible. She just thought I was. So did I for a long time. My father never did. He saw me from the beginning. And in the end, that turned out to be enough.